Chapter 7: The Judgment and the Revelation. The case moved quickly, the weight of public outrage pushing the police and courts to act decisively. Inspector Sharma ensured the charges were well documented, and soon the charge sheet was filed. When Myra's father, Dr. Ramesh Mehra, the respected medical director of the city's premier hospital, received the news of her involvement, disbelief paralyzed him. His only daughter, the one he had cherished and protected after the untimely death of her mother, had been implicated in a crime so grave it shook him to his core. Anger and confusion coursed through him. Why hadn't Mira come to him earlier? He could have intervened, asking his brother, a senior judge, to look into the matter discreetly. But now, it seems too late. Little did he know that Myra's silence was born out of loyalty to Ashok Malik, the man she had loved blindly. Mira sat in her cell, consumed by a swirl of guilt and misplaced hope. She believed that Ashok would use his legal acumen to minimize her punishment, to find some loophole that could protect her from severe consequences. She held on to this belief, ignoring the gnawing suspicion that Ashok's promises were as hollow as they felt. Dr. Mehra visited Mira, the sorrow etched deeply into the lines of his face. His once proud posture seemed to sag under the weight of the situation. "Why, Mira? Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, the pain in his voice palpable. Myra's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man who had raised her alone, who had given her everything. The regret clawed at her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I'm sorry, Papa," she choked out, as he nodded, unable to continue. The room grew silent except for the distant clang of metal and shouts echoing from other cells. The sight of his daughter in chains was too much. He excused himself, the shock manifesting as sharp, sudden pain in his chest. He left, stumbling outside, barely keeping upright. Meanwhile, at the Raheja estate, Mr. Dev spoke to Arjun on the phone. His tone was firm, an unfamiliar warmth slipping in. "I've done my part, Arjun. I will use all my influence to ensure she gets the maximum sentence." "You deserve justice," he said, hoping to finally bridge the chasm between them. Arjun thanked him briefly, his mind focused on the upcoming trial. The court was buzzing with anticipation on Judgment Day. Journalists, reporters, and a curious public filled every corner of the room, murmurs ceasing as Mira was brought in. Her eyes darted around, searching for Ashok, but he was conspicuously absent. Anxiety clawed at her as she wondered where he was. Ashok had delegated the case to another prosecutor, distancing himself from the scandal and from her. The arguments began, the defense weak and Myra's silence doing little to help. The prosecutor painted a vivid picture of negligence and disregard for life. The judge's questions were sharp, demanding clarity. Myra's responses were quiet, hollow, as if she'd resigned herself to whatever fate awaited her. When the final verdict was delivered, maximum sentencing for her crime, gasps rippled through the courtroom. Dr. Mehra stood up, a hand on his chest as he tried to breathe. He collapsed before anyone could react. Myra's scream pierced the air, "Save my father!" Arjun, sitting nearby, leapt into action. Memories of his own mother's sudden death flashed before him as he began CPR on Dr. Mehra, driven not by duty but by empathy. The medics arrived, rushing Dr. Mehra onto a stretcher with Arjun's help. Mira watched in stunned silence, tears streaming as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. Arjun, whose life she had destroyed, was now trying to save her father. The contradiction struck her like a blow. Hours later, Arjun sat by Dr. Mehra's side in the hospital. He hadn't left, despite the questions and the confusion from those around him. When Myra's application to visit her father was approved, she was brought in, her shackles rattling against the sterile hospital floor. She saw Arjun, tired and worn, sitting near the bed. The image of him there, steadfast even when he had every reason to hate her, made her heart ache with an emotion she couldn't name. "I'm going for coffee," Arjun said quietly as she entered. Do you want one? She shook her head, unable to speak. He nodded and left the room. Mira sat beside her unconscious father, guilt squeezing her heart. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. Daddy, I'm innocent. I'm so sorry for not telling you about the accident. I didn't do it, but I couldn't tell anyone. Tears slid down her cheeks, falling onto the white sheets. Please, wake up, she whispered over and over, her body trembling. Arjun, returning, paused at the door. The words he heard stopped him cold. His mind spun as he watched Mira, broken and desperate, muttering through tears. The realization clawed at him, she wasn't the culprit. Rage mixed with confusion as he stepped inside. What did you just say? He demanded, startling Mira into silence. She turned, eyes wide and pale. She stammered, the promise she'd made to Ashok tying her tongue. But Arjun wasn't leaving without answers. Who are you protecting? He demanded, his voice rising. Myra's resolve crumbled, but she kept her mouth shut, tears streaming as she sobbed silently. A fire lit in Arjun's eyes. He needed to know the truth. His heart pounded with the urgency of finding justice not only for Elena and their unborn child but also for Mira, who seemed trapped by something much larger. Turning abruptly, he whispered to his waiting friend to get the car. The police stationed outside would be a problem, but he had a plan. Before the escort could react, Arjun grabbed Myra's wrist and bolted, pulling her along. They burst into the corridor, and within moments they were outside, the police's shouts following them. Arjun's friend gunned the engine, and the car screeched away, taking them into the night as sirens roared behind them. The chase was on, but so was Arjun's quest for the truth that could change everything. Chapter 8: The Midnight Escape. The car raced down the dark, deserted road, the city lights fading into the background as the roar of sirens grew faint but insistent. This road was no stranger to Arjun, it was where he had poured his heart and soul into building a future, a home for Elena, one that would have cradled their dreams and the life they had planned to nurture together. Now, that same path was cloaked in shadow, carrying the weight of a different mission altogether. Rohit, Arjun called to his friend who was gripping the steering wheel, sweat glistening on his forehead. The name fell heavy with meaning, a sign that this escape was more than just a flight, it was a battle to uncover truth buried in silence. Slow down and pull over here, Arjun instructed, pointing to the unfinished construction site hidden by thickets and the gloom of unlit surroundings. Rohit's knuckles widened as he brought the car to a shuddering stop. Are you sure about this? He asked, glancing nervously at Mira, who sat with her head bowed, strands of hair sticking to her damp face. She looked lost, a figure of confusion and quiet dread. Just do it. Drive on after we get out. Make them follow you as far as possible, Arjun said, his voice firm. The whine of distant sirens drew closer, and urgency clawed at the car's occupants. Whatever happens, don't say a word about us. You know where I'll be, he added, his eyes locking with Rohit's silent trust. Rohit nodded, swallowing hard before glancing back at Mira. Take care, man, he said, the words clipped but filled with unspoken loyalty. Arjun reached for Myra's arm, helping her out. She stumbled as her feet hit the rough gravel, but Arjun caught her, guiding her into the safety of shadows. Within seconds, Rohit gunned the engine, the tires squealing as he took off down a narrow path that veered away from the main road. The patrol cars, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness, surged past Arjun and Mira, following the decoy. The roar of engines receded into the distance, leaving only the quiet thrum of insects and the soft, rhythmic sound of Myra's uneven breathing. Arjun turned to face her, eyes searching for answers that only she held. The raw edges of his rage softened, replaced by a gnawing desperation. We need to talk, Mira. "Now," he said, voice low but resolute. Myra's gaze darted up, meeting his. In the darkness, his features were half lit by the pale glow of the moon, casting shadows that deepened the sorrow in his eyes. The man before her wasn't just seeking revenge anymore, he was seeking truth, justice for the love he had lost and for the innocence she claimed. "Why are we here?" Myra's voice trembled, breaking the tense silence. It was a question full of fear, but also a glimmer of hope that perhaps someone would finally believe her. "This was supposed to be our home," Arjun said, looking up at the half-constructed building, its skeleton rising like a monument to lost dreams. "Elena's and mine. Now it's where I'll find out the truth. Tell me, Mira, who are you protecting? If you're innocent, who did it?" Mira took a shaky breath, her resolve cracking as tears pooled in her eyes. The weight of loyalty clashed with the horror of betrayal. The silent, dark road seemed to hold its breath as she hesitated, the truth teetering on the tip of her tongue. Arjun's voice cut through the night, laced with an urgency that bordered on pleading. "Please, Mira. For Elena. For the child who never got to live. Don't let this end like this." Chapter 9, Shadows of Truth and Blood. The narrow, deserted road stretched before them, shrouded in silence. Arjun had just forced Mira out of the car and into the skeletal remains of the home he once dreamed of sharing with Elena. It was a house built on love, now repurposed for a quest for truth. Mira sat quietly, her eyes wide with apprehension as Arjun paced back and forth, fury and desperation warring in his expression. Without a word, Arjun locked her inside, needing space to cool the storm of emotions roiling inside him. He slammed the door and left, walking into the cool night air to calm himself, not realizing that his rash move had sent ripples of consequence far beyond the shadowed perimeter. Inside the half-finished house, Mira paced restlessly. Her eyes fell upon the small personal touches Arjun had added, the photograph of Elena, the wedding dress, and a small ring nestled in its velvet case. Guilt clawed at her heart, an oppressive weight she could no longer bear. Tears rolled down her face as she traced her fingers over the fabric of the dress, realizing the depth of pain she had unwittingly been a part of. Ashok had been a mistake, a betrayal not just to her but to those who had loved without boundaries. The creak of the front door signaled Arjun's return. She turned, feeling an almost overpowering urge to throw herself into his arms and confess everything. His kindness to her father, despite everything, had awakened something deep within her. But before any words could pass between them, a faint noise outside caught Arjun's attention. A car engine sputtered to a stop nearby. Arjun's brow furrowed as he moved cautiously to the window. In the moonlight, he could see a shadow creeping toward the house, moving with stealth. He turned to Mira, his voice low and serious. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." He stepped outside into the night, eyes scanning for the source of the movement. The killer, skilled in his craft, used the moment to slip in through the back door. Mira barely had time to react before she saw the glint of the knife, a deadly arc slicing through the darkness. "Arjun!" she screamed, the sound breaking through the night like a thunderclap. Arjun spun around and rushed inside, eyes locking on the figure lunging toward Mira. Without thinking, he pulled her out of harm's way. The knife, meant for Mira, found its target in Arjun's abdomen instead. Pain exploded through him as he gripped the killer's wrist, wrestling him for control. Blood seeped from his wound, staining his shirt in a crimson bloom. Myra's eyes darted around frantically until they landed on a metal rod. With a burst of adrenaline, she grabbed it and swung it at the killer's head. The impact was solid, a sickening thud that sent the man crumpling to the floor, unconscious. "Get a rope," Arjun gasped, struggling to stay upright. Mira rushed to a nearby storage area and returned with a length of rope. Hands shaking, she handed it to Arjun, who tied the killer's hands and feet, securing him to a column. The effort cost him, his vision swam as blood loss sapped his strength. "Press this, against my wound," Arjun whispered, barely holding on. Mira grabbed a towel from a nearby box and pressed it firmly against his stomach, her hands slick with blood and trembling with panic. "Stay with me, Arjun," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But as the minutes passed, Arjun's eyes fluttered closed, and he slumped into unconsciousness, leaving Mira alone with the weight of everything unsaid. Chapter 10: The Veil of Truth Unfolds. Mira stood in the dimly lit room, her mind racing. Blood stained the floor where Arjun lay, barely conscious. Panic surged through her, but she fought it down, clinging to a thread of calm. The only sound was the ragged breathing of the bound killer who had regained consciousness, eyes darting like a caged animal but unable to move. Arjun groaned, struggling to prop himself up. Mira, overcome by an unfamiliar sense of protectiveness, moved to help him. He leaned on her, the weight of his exhaustion palpable. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief contact, Mira felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, guilt, and something more profound she couldn't yet name. "You saved me," she whispered, half to herself. Arjun's lips twitched into a faint smile, but it faded quickly as he noticed the killer staring back with unrepentant eyes. Summoning strength, he approached the bound man, picking up the rod Mira had used. "Why are you here? Who sent you?" Arjun's voice was low, cold, a stark departure from the man he usually was. The killer said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. Arjun's knuckles whitened as he gripped the rod, and with a sudden burst of fury, he struck the man's knees. The killer gasped, pain finally breaking his silence. "Who sent you?" Arjun demanded, eyes blazing. "All right," the killer spat, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was Ashok. He paid me to kill her, so she wouldn't talk." Arjun's eyes shifted to Mira, whose face was a mix of disbelief and pain. Ashok. The name echoed in her mind, a sharp reminder of betrayal. Everything that had transpired, every lie she had believed, it all crystallized in that moment. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't of sorrow. They were of rage, of realization. Mira turned to Arjun, her voice trembling. "I was a fool, Arjun. He manipulated me, used me. I trusted him," her fingers intertwined with Arjun's, a silent plea for understanding. "But you need to know everything about that night." Arjun, wavering on the edge of consciousness, nodded and allowed her to guide him to a chair. With trembling hands, she recounted the accident, every detail tumbling out, Ashok's role, her decision to protect him, the guilt that had eaten at her every day since. The room was silent as Arjun absorbed her confession. His eyes fluttered, and he whispered, "Mira, call the police, my phone." His head lolled back, and his body slumped, a sheen of sweat covering his face. Mira's heart clenched. "No, stay with me, Arjun." She ran to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of cold water and a cloth. She returned to his side and gently placed the cloth on his forehead. As she tended to him, her eyes traced the lines of his face. The anger, the pain, the relentless pursuit of justice, it all made sense now. She felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom inside her. Was this love? Arjun's eyes fluttered behind his closed lids, and he mumbled, "Elena, the baby." The ghostly image of Elena appeared in his mind, holding a child, both figures slowly fading away. Then, he saw Mira, cradling the baby, her face gentle and kind. He whispered, "Mira, be careful." "I'm here, Arjun," Mira said softly, holding his hand. "I'll take care of you." He opened his eyes slowly, reality settling back in. "Did you call the police?" Mira shook her head. "You were burning with fever. I had to take care of you first." A small, grateful smile appeared on his lips before he reached for his phone and called Inspector Sharma. Within minutes, sirens pierced the quiet night as police cars surrounded the house. The killer, still bound and beaten, glared defiantly as officers dragged him away. Meera gave her statement in front of the judge, detailing every moment of the accident and Ashok's deceit. It wasn't long before Ashok was arrested, his ambitions and treachery laid bare for all to see. The weight of secrets lifted, Meera looked at Arjun, whose wounds were now bandaged and healing. Their eyes met once more, this time with a shared understanding. The pain was still there, but in that pain, a new beginning took root. Chapter 11, A New Dawn. The weight of loss and betrayal once clouded their lives, but from that darkness emerged something neither Meera nor Arjun could have foreseen, a bond forged in pain, strengthened by truth, and tempered with forgiveness. They began as tentative allies, piecing together the shattered fragments of their lives. As days turned into months, those initial, wary glances transformed into laughter shared over late-night conversations and moments of quiet understanding. Myra's father, now fully recovered, learned the truth about the accident that had shadowed their family. The revelation left him pained, but also proud of his daughter's courage in facing it. His gratitude toward Arjun was immeasurable. The man who had once seemed a specter of vengeance was now the one who saved his life. Arjun's father, seeing his son's determination and unwavering heart, found newfound respect for both Meera and her father. The two families, bound by tragedy and redemption, forged an unexpected friendship. They shared dinners, stories, and moments that began to knit them into one family. The turning point came on a crisp autumn evening. The sky was painted with hues of gold and crimson, as Arjun knelt before Meera in the garden where the roses they had planted bloomed. He held her hand, eyes glistening with the light of love and hope. "Meera, our story began in pain, but it's one I wouldn't trade for anything because it brought me to you. Will you write the rest of our story with me as my partner, my love, my everything?" Tears welled in Myra's eyes, but they were not of sadness. They were tears of joy, of a life reclaimed. "Yes, Arjun, 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was a celebration not just of love but of healing, attended by friends and family who had witnessed their journey from grief to grace. Under the twinkling lights and amidst the laughter of those they cherished, they promised forever. A year later, joy multiplied as they welcomed a beautiful daughter into their lives. She had Myra's bright eyes and Arjun's unwavering spirit. As the families gathered around, cooing at the tiny miracle in Myra's arms, there was an unspoken understanding among them. Life had come full circle. The daughter, named Alara, carried a piece of the past and the hope of a future unmarred by shadows. In that moment, Arjun and Meera exchanged a glance, one that spoke of the path they had walked, the trials they had overcome, and the love that had been their guiding light. There was peace in their hearts and warmth in their home, a reminder that even the most broken roads can lead to a place of profound happiness. And as they watched the sun set behind their house, the house once meant for Elena but now filled with new memories, Arjun whispered to Meera, "We found our way through the storm." Meera leaned into him, holding Alara close. "And we'll continue to find our way, together." Their story was one of loss, of redemption, and ultimately, of love that healed and endured, a tale that left an impression, reminding those who heard it that in life, even the most battered hearts can find a second chance, and with it, a new dawn.
दोस्तों, तो लाइक करो, सब्सक्राइब करो और बेल नोटिफिकेशन पर क्लिक करो।